Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith. Thank you so much for joining me today, and happy June as we are well into Gemini season now. With so many outer planets in the air and fire signs, we knew time would seem to speed up, and it sure has as we are fast approaching the summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. I cannot believe how fast the time is going. Now, I wanted to do a specific episode on the upcoming Pluto Uranus trine that will be exact on July 19th this year, but it will make 5 direct hits as the planets undergo their retrograde cycles between July of 2026 and May of 2028. Now, Uranus and Pluto cycles, when they come into aspect with each other, tend to correlate with intense transformation periods in the collective. Richard Tarnas has studied and wrote about this topic extensively. He calls the Uranus-Pluto cycles the revolution cycles, as revolutions, movements, and breakthroughs tend to correspond with Uranus and Pluto alignments, and specifically the conjunction square opposition cycles. Tarnas found that the Uranus-Pluto cycle corresponds to eras where the power structures in place, Pluto, are challenged by forces that want liberation, awakening, and transformation, Uranus. Now, just to give you an idea of how these cycles work, because I find it incredibly helpful to have a larger context to work from, let's go back to the previous cycle. Now, overall, a Pluto-Uranus cycle goes something like this. We have a conjunction that starts a new evolutionary impulse. So it's the birth of something new. Then we have a waxing square. And you can think of these cycles just like the lunation cycles, right? We have the new moon, the waxing crescent, the first quarter, waxing gibbous, full moon, which is the opposition. And then we have the waning gibbous, the last quarter, and the balsamic or waning crescent. So that's the cycle as we know of the moon. And so the conjunction or new moon, quote unquote, of the Pluto-Uranus cycle is when Pluto and Uranus are conjunct. That starts a new cycle. So we have the conjunction, then we have the waxing square. And that waxing square is where that new impulse creates conflict. So something new has arrived. Okay, now what? Who gets the power? And so it can mark times of conflict and power struggles over that. Then we have the waxing trine. And this is where society starts using the new thing effectively and even expanding it. So these mark periods of efficiency and momentum. Then we have the opposition. And this is where we see what problems this new thing has created. So we can see visible consequences that ultimately lead to problem solving. Then we have the waning trine, and that is how do we live with those problems and how do we adapt to them. So this is like the problem solving integration phase. And then we have the waning square, and this is showing us basically what needs to be dismantled, what is no longer working. Now, in the previous cycle, Uranus was conjunct Pluto in 1850 to 1851 in Aries. So we are going back one full cycle now. And this conjunction marked what was essentially the birth of our modern industrialized world. So we started seeing the expansion of all of these industrial technologies that created fast movement areas in things like railroads, the telegraph, steam power, factories, urbanization. And so the impulse basically was to innovate, compete, break new ground, go fast, go faster, pioneer, all of the Aries themes. But all these new industrial technologies started causing problems. And we saw this during that waxing square, which happened in 1876 to 1877. So as an example, we have railroad strikes. So, okay, we've built this railroad. Now what? Who gets the power? Who gets to benefit? So it became the center of a major conflict. There was a major inequality going on at this point. Some people were thriving, others were suffering. We saw the beginning of labor struggles. So the waxing square is the beginning of the conflict around that new impulse. So then what's next? We have the waxing trine, which happened in 1884 to 1885. And this was when we saw society start organizing itself around these industrial technologies. So they already existed by this trine, but the trine was when they became mass integrated and used efficiently and became expanded. So as an example, electricity was already discovered by this trine, but it wasn't until the trine that it became part of everyday life, fully integrated. Societies started forming around these technologies like electricity, like the railroad. Then the opposition showed the problems that this new impulse has caused, and there can be a divide between sides here. So the opposition in 1901 to 1902, we started clearly seeing the problem with mass wealth and power concentration in large corporations. There was labor versus employer concerns leading to strikes and unions. We have these competitions basically between countries that are like gearing up in an arms race, militarizing. We have old elite powers versus new ones. So this opposition was showing essentially the problems that emerged from the new industrial age. Then we have the waning trine, which was the problem solving of these new issues. So how do we adapt to this? How do we live with this? The waning trine is about integrating the consequences, where the waxing trine expands and integrates the new impulse, the new technology. The waning trine problem solves and integrates the consequences of that. So this was the emergence of humanity living inside the industrialized system. This waning trine was between 1921 to 1922. And we saw humanity adapting and living inside this new system with things like media, radio, consumerism, new physics emerged with the theory of relativity, all of these things. And then finally the waning square, which was between 1932 and 1933, where we faced what was no longer working with the economy that was formed through the modern industrialization. And of course, we had the Great Depression. So mass unemployment, bank failures, poverty. I mean, the economy basically collapsed. And the events during this square basically paved the way for a new cycle. So now the current Uranus Pluto cycle we are in started with the conjunction in 1965 to 1966 in the sign of Virgo. Now, this cycle beginning in Virgo is important because just like how our new moon will occur in one astrological sign, and that sign's themes are the focus of that cycle's intention, Virgo wants to bring the internal and external into alignment. So Virgo knows that the external is a perfect metaphor for the internal, and in order to better understand the internal, it must correctly perceive the external. So Virgo is the process of correcting our perception through direct observation and carefully analyzing the material external world. So the new cycle started as a collective challenge to humanity's existing perceptions. So the theme is kind of the world is not what we thought it was. And a common thread through many 1960s developments is not just about rebellion. On a deeper level, it is the realization that the official story and the lived reality were often very different. So the narrative that we were given didn't quite seem to match our experience. So television, for example, presented people with images that contradicted the given narrative. So we have the narrative saying, oh, we are free, land of the free, and images now showing people in segregation, police violence, suppression, and basically all of these ways that people are not, in fact, free. So there is a discrepancy between how a nation saw itself, the stories being told, and what was actually being observed in lived experience. So Virgo wants to correct perception because when we don't perceive something accurately, distortions cause issues that need to be fixed or healed, and all healing is done through perception. Also, during the 60s, we have the psychedelic movement, which is all about altering and changing our perception. The second wave of feminism, women who were quietly living under the assumption that their experience was a reflection of them personally, and they began comparing their personal experiences and started recognizing patterns that were not just personal to them and had been normalized. So challenging the narrative here. There was also a growing interest in psychology and consciousness, trying to understand our perception. How do I know what I know? What distortions are in my perception? So these are all ways that Uranus conjunct Pluto are the beginning of a new cycle of challenging our existing perceptions. The world is not what you think it is. There are a lot of distortions in your perception of the world, and in Pluto fashion, let's do a deep dive, excavate, and challenge it. So the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Virgo during the 60s initiated a collective evolutionary process aimed at refining our human capacity for perception. Now, we don't typically associate technology with Virgo, and it is not traditionally something Virgo rules. That is Aquarius territory. But technology is fundamentally an extension of our perception. So every major technology of the cycle expanded our ability to receive and analyze information, which Virgo loves. So computers, digital networks, sensors, databases, the internet, AI, these are technologies for processing data. So naturally, a Pluto-Uranus cycle that began in Virgo is going to be highly focused on questioning the quality of information and data itself. The social, psychological, technological, and spiritual revolutions that were all happening were all expressions of that single underlying evolutionary impulse, which began with that conjunction in Virgo, which is to reduce the gap between reality and our perception of reality. So we have civil rights exposing social distortions. We have feminism exposing relational distortions. We have psychology exposing psychic distortions. Psychedelics exposing perceptual distortions. Computers exposing informational distortions. The internet exposing collective distortions. And now AI may be exposing cognitive distortions. So the entire Uranus-Pluto cycle that began in Virgo could actually be a decades-long experiment in humanity learning how to perceive itself more accurately. So Virgo wants to perceive reality accurately without distortions. And because we have a Uranus-Pluto trine happening in the air signs of Gemini and Aquarius that are all about information, communication, and networks, the question now is, what happens when our perception becomes networked? Okay, let me explain. Our perception used to come from our firsthand or individual experience. So what you know would be limited to what you have personally experienced, discovered, or gained through some personal way of learning, maybe even like stories being passed down in your family. But a lot of it was pretty well firsthand. But now, most of your perceptions are coming from systems which are entirely unpersonal and networked. So what you know about climate change, world events, financial markets, scientific discoveries, political conflicts, you receive this information through networks. So your perception itself is partially outsourced. You read an article, you watch a video, you consult AI, use GPS, or even searching the web. You are accessing that network through your nervous system. So now, because your perception is outsourced, it is no longer located solely in one individual mind. So in order to have your perception solely located in your own mind, you would need to be raised offline and not have access to these systems that give you the perceptions you have today. If you just think about all of the things that you quote unquote know, and how many of those things have you experienced firsthand? You know there is political conflict. Have you experienced that political conflict for yourself firsthand? Have you personally spoken to the heads of state that are involved? You know that the Earth is floating in space and a moon is orbiting around us. Have you been to outer space firsthand? Have you personally flown to the moon to see it firsthand? Not very likely for most of us, but we receive this information from the network. Sometimes I think to myself, what if I couldn't trust anything that I haven't personally seen or experienced firsthand? You are a sovereign being who can choose to believe absolutely anything you wish to. I mean, we all get to make this choice when it comes to information that is not local to us. But how can you absolutely know with 100% certainty without experiencing it in some way for yourself? It's a new challenge to our perception because we are now taking this network of information almost for granted as to how easy it is to just believe what is given to us. So that Virgo energy of the Pluto-Uranus conjunction wants to be able to discern. Let's say before the internet, maybe you wouldn't believe something unless you saw it for yourself, just as an example. So someone could tell you something and you would be discerning to if it matched your personal experience of truth. But now we have built our perceptions on non-local information that isn't firsthand. And through networks and outside sources, often who we haven't even met in person. And that has made it very easy to be able to share information, but it's a double-edged sword because it's also made it easy to share distortions. So because we no longer need personal validation to consider something as true, we read an article, we see an authority figure on TV claiming something, whatever it is, we have been basing our perception on secondhand information or network information for some time now. So we are forming a collective planetary nervous system. The internet has connected us. AI is now centralizing all of that information into one system. Social media platforms have allowed ideas, emotions, and narratives to be shared basically instantly. This is the signature of a collective intelligence. So we are now sharing knowledge, expertise, intelligence. But we can also share distortion and false beliefs. So Virgo started out asking the question, is my perception accurate? And now the question has become, is the network's perception accurate? Because this is what we have outsourced our perception to. So now we have a really interesting outcome, because before you observed the world and made conclusions. There was the observer and there was the observed. And this was the model that we built science on. The observer passively observing the world as separate from it. But today, modern science is discovering the observer is not separate from the observed. And here we have a network where your observations are shaped by other observers. So you observe the world observes you. The network influences what you observe. We call these algorithms. You react to the algorithms, and the network updates and the cycle repeats. So now the individual observer is no longer separate from the observed, is no longer separate from the informational field, which modern science has now told us is the case. So the cycle started with Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgo, and Virgo wants to understand the inner world through the reflection in the outer one. And AI is a very powerful manifestation that can aid this Virgo drive. AI is a system that is trained based on our collective output, right? Everything we have published, written, thought, created, debated, all of us is in AI. So it is a mirror constructed from our shared language and perceptions, our beliefs, fears, assumptions, dreams, etc. And when we interact with AI, we are interacting with aspects of our collective psyche being reflected back to us. And this is why discussions around AI become so philosophical, because we are not just asking what this technology can do. We are asking what we can do. What are we? What is intelligence? What is consciousness? What is creativity? So the mirror is turning back to the observer. Now, the Virgo conjunction of the 60s has initiated a decades-long process of refining our perception. And the trine between Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini marks a point where refining our own perception can no longer happen at an individual level. And this is because Uranus in Gemini is revolutionizing the way we communicate, connect, and receive information. And Aquarius is the collective network. So now, can we discern collectively? If our perception is no longer localized to our individual mind, because it's not, we can no longer individually discern. We need to be able to collectively discern. So as an example, if you're getting your information from the GPS system better be accurate and able to correctly discern between streets to properly give you directions. Now that is just a grossly understated metaphor, but you get the idea. So revolutions have historically focused on who controls land, resources, wealth, government, institutions, and now the question is, who controls perception? Or how do we form our perception? The Virgo cycle began with the purification of the individual perception. And as this cycle waxes with the Pluto-Uranus trine, with Pluto in Aquarius, we are at the stage of asking whether that purification can occur at the level of the collective mind. Because Virgo is all about purifying our perception. So we are in a waxing trine here in 2026 to 2028, where we can expect to see the themes of integration and expansion play out, where we use the new technology, we'll say, effectively and start organizing society around it. So I can absolutely see the predictions of AI becoming integrated within 2 years being accurate here. A waxing trine is about how we structure our society around something to integrate it, and we learn to use it very efficiently. So it's no longer new and novel. It just becomes part of our everyday lives. And we start expanding it. So what else can it do? How else can we use this effectively? All themes I would expect during a waxing trine. It's ease, flow. Trines are very easy and effortless energy, so momentum can happen pretty quickly, and before you know it, you've adapted to something new. So I hope this is helpful in just giving some insight into this upcoming Uranus-Pluto trine that will be playing out for the next 2 years, and where we are in this larger Pluto-Uranus cycle at this time. So thank you for joining, and I wish you a very magical week ahead.